everybody. So today we have a very special guest, my dear friend Parag. Now, Parag is one of the pioneers and one of the first VCs of India, I guess you could say, from 1993. And he has a phenomenal story, an incredible journey that he's gone through. And I'm very excited to have him here with us today to share his journey and the lessons he's learned along the way. And beyond all that, Parag is just an incredible, incredible guy. So Parag, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for that great introduction.
So Parag, let's jump right into it. So before Inventus, GE, IC, before everything, where are you from and what was your upbringing like?
So I'm from the eastern part of India, Calcutta in particular, but never grew up there. I grew up in a small university town in North India, a state called Uttarakhand, a small town called Pantnagar, which is, as I said, a university town. So it was kind of a very small town. You looked at a girl for for an extra second and your father would know in 30 minutes. That smaller town. And it seemed claustrophobic at that time because it was so small and there were limited opportunities for various things. But when I look back, it was one of the best places to grow up in, and most of us think that way. From Patna, think that way because there were forests nearby. There was a hill you could go out rowing, etc., which is not things that people get in cities in India, for example. So very fortunate from that perspective. Pantnagar is where the Green Revolution in India started. Very nice agricultural university. My father was on the technology college, at the technology college. He used to teach there. So 18 years in that kind of a town, and then I came to IIT Delhi, a big city, for my engineering, and that also has a backstory because when you grow up in a place like Pantnagar, you have three choices. You're either an engineer, a doctor, or a failure. So I didn't want to be the latter two, so I ended up as an engineer. That's how things happen in India. They are changing now, I should say. During our times, that's how it worked. So went to IIT, realized I probably didn't like depth as much as I liked width, etc. I ended up doing my MBA. And after my MBA, I joined the venture capital world, which is kind of strange. And most people don't get into venture capital at that young an age, but it was a good break. Yes.
Right. Wow. So before we jump into that whole part, I want to understand, when you look at India now, the way kids are growing up, how different is it from when you were growing up?
So I think one clear thing is their confidence and the knowledge that they have at a young age. Thanks mainly to the internet, I would say. That has changed things. Our access to computers, there was no internet during the days when we were growing up. So the amount that they know about other countries, about what is happening across the world, etc., is just phenomenal. And the confidence that they get, the way they can market themselves. We were hesitant English speakers during that time growing up in North India, in those parts where Hindi is spoken most often. Most of these kids, at least our kids going to good schools, speak English almost as if it's their first language. They have the confidence. They learn to market themselves. Are ambitious, much more ambitious than us. We were very middle class in our thinking. We wanted steady jobs, etc., when we graduated. These kids think very, very differently, and it's all for the good. In my
100%. So when you came to you went to IIT, when you came to Bangalore, was there a big culture shock? Like you entering a big city for the first, coming from a small town kid to like all of a sudden this whole entire flamboyant, massive city. What was it going on?
The IIT was in Delhi, actually. IIM was in Bangalore, which was my MBA was in Bangalore. But yes, there was a change for sure. But it was still a protected environment because it was a campus where you lived together with people like that. And typically, you had middle class kids all around. Some of them were from cities, so to that extent, far more comfortable with, let's say, English and other things. Larger cities, moving around, that confidence they had much more than we probably from second tier towns had. But it was not a radical difference, simply because these were hardworking kids. Getting through IIT, as you probably know, is not easy. I'm not trying to trying to boast or anything, but these were really hardworking kids, people like us who grew up in middle class India and various parts of the country, and knew that education was one way to kind of grow across classes in society.
Right.
And as a consequence, very similar attitude. So it was a phenomenal. But we had never stayed outside of home till then. Very protected environment, big city. So all of us formed the ecosystem amongst ourselves, supported each other. There were tough times. There were easy times. The IIT system was new. Relative grading is something that we hadn't seen before. All of that, yeah, but you get adjusted to it because of the quality of people around you and friends around you. So,
right. So let's get to the main event. You graduate from IIM, your business school, you get your MBA, and you get this crazy idea, and let me join venture capital. Now, back then in 1993, India, the startup ecosystem was non-existent to begin with. You had you had a few companies that were outsourcing companies to the US. What was the mark of the ecosystem for venture capital back then, and what made you decide to even to jump in and take that risk and go join a venture capital firm?
Okay. So the second question first. So I call it the Russian roulette of placement. It was not a very well considered decision. What I wanted to do was what I thought. As engineers, you want a finance job because you're good with numbers, etc., etc. And I got through this more by accident. I didn't know much about venture capital, but for what I had read and all of that. So that's how I got in. But 1-2 years into the thing, I realized it suits my temperament. By nature, I'm somebody who looks who's patient, who can wait for the things. I'm not a sales guy by nature. I don't need to sell something tomorrow and get a kick out of that. My kicks can come over a period of time, and that makes me happy. I want bigger kicks, but it takes longer to get those kicks, so to speak. So venture capital that way was ideally meant for me. I really liked it. Yes, the ecosystem was very immature. The industry managed $50 million. That is a million with an M. That's all. So it was really small. ICICI Venture, the company that I worked for, was a subsidiary of one of the largest banks in India. They had started venture capital in India in 1988, and I joined them in 1993. So there were probably 40-50 investments done throughout the country in the venture capital thing. It was being transported from the US, Silicon Valley, into India. Most of the companies there were variations of software companies. So we funded a company, a successful one called Geometric, for example, which went on to do quite well, but it was CAD/CAM software nevertheless, and a bit of tools thrown in. Somebody else was in software distribution, somebody was doing something in Microsoft technologies, etc., etc. It was variations of that software outsourcing kind of things with a bit of IP thrown in. During that time between, let's say, 93 to 2005. That was largely the market, which was investing in companies which sold services slash products outside of India. Mostly services out of India. Starting 2005, and I attribute that to Airtel in particular, the Indian market, people realized, was large enough because of the number of people. Airtel started selling that many mobile phones, mobile connections, and that's when people started getting into Make My Trip and Redbus subsequently for us, etc., and the consumer internet kind of started taking off.
Right. Wow. It's just fascinating. Even $15 million. And compared to now, which the past quarter, if I'm not mistaken, was like, 300 million was invested the past quarter.
I know. Those are those are ridiculously low numbers. If I look back, I can't reconcile to myself why I joined. But as I said, it was a very good decision. I've learned a lot about business. I think I never knew that when I did my MBA that I was a student of business. But this perch, BVC perch, especially when you're looking at technology companies, that's so good. If you really want to understand why business succeeds or fails, there's no one answer for everybody, but there's some basic learnings, and that is just amazing for me. So I stumbled into it, I should say.
I don't even want to know what your parents are probably thinking. Your parents are like, hey, you can't get a normal engineering job. You can't work for a big company. What are you doing?
My father tried to push me towards the public sector. In India, we have a lot of government owned companies during that time. Now mostly it is private. So my father tried to push me there. I spent a year there. I realized I was a total misfit. So from MBA onwards, I decided my father would have nothing to do with my career. I needed to make my own decisions, and that is proven right in the long term.
So, what difference do you see between the entrepreneurs over the years? You've been in this business for almost 20 plus years, and it's a lot. And especially, not just in the US, but in anywhere in general, being in the venture capital business for 20 plus years. You've seen every type of cycle. You've seen, all types of entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of questions I have related to that part. So I guess we'll break it up. So the first part is, what difference do you see between the entrepreneurs from 1993, that whole period, I guess, till 2005, and from like 2005 all the way to 2018 now?
So I think if you looked at first thing is age. The difference is age. Typical entrepreneur during that 93 to 2005 phase was a 45-year-old, 50-year-old who had been an executive in a large company, had made his nest egg, was starting this off because he could take the risk then. From 2005 onwards, younger people started to take that risk because, as somebody beautifully told me, that unlike Parag, the times that you grew up in, one of the younger entrepreneurs said that, we lived off the internet. We paid our mobile bills. We did everything. Bought stuff of Flipkart, etc., etc. So they had the tools. We, on the other hand, saw a computer for the first time when it was not that bad, but basically used a computer really when we ended up at IIT, so to speak. So here, kids grew up with that at home and during this thing, and they were. Socialist India, if you know our history, Indira Gandhi and other stuff, left a lot of gaps on the business front, especially fragmentation. There was a lot of fragmentation of various industries, for example. So funny at Red Bus, which is one of our largest successes, tried to aggregate, did a great job of aggregating bus operators in India, for example. So the younger guys, the youth is one key difference. Second, I briefly mentioned during that 93 to 2000 time frame, it was variations of software services. Now it is all over the map. So you have IoT coming in, somebody doing blockchain, somebody doing software as a service, using behavioral science, if you can believe that, etc., etc. It's all over the map, and that makes it far more exciting. People today are far more ambitious. Availability of capital, the ecosystem has matured, all of those things, and you have to give credit where it is due. People like this Lee Fixell at Tiger took some of the entrepreneurs from India to China and showed them what could be achieved. The scale of ambition went up in the last 5-7 years, and that is just amazing. The entrepreneurs of 2000, for example, were never this ambitious. So those are some of the key differences that I find.
And also amazing to see, like, as you know, India is a very risk-averse culture. You're growing up to go to the school, get that government job, work in the public sector, or whatever it may be, because it's all about having that security, knowing what you have. And to do this whole now that people are going and jumping right into entrepreneurship, even skipping college now, it's just a phenomenal thing to see. how it's adapting, and people are having a bigger risk tolerance and everything. So that is obviously the difference between entrepreneurship. What difference did you see, in venture capital wise? You've seen everything too. What are the differences you see now? And I'm assuming also your framework, I'd love to know if your framework has adapted and changed over the years, or it's something that's like you have this set core principles to your investing theory.
Okay. So yes, principles do evolve, but some base stays the same. For example, when you're looking at a company, you're basically at the early stage that we are getting in, you're essentially talking about the quality of the team, the chemistry between them. Can they stay this journey for at least 6, 7, 10 years? That's what you're looking at as the first bucket. The second bucket is the size, growth of the market, and third bucket is the competitive advantage that you bring to the table in various forms. Technology could be, business model could be another. So that base stays the same, but as you get more experienced, as you see more, you develop some other thumb rules, heuristics, so to speak. For example, you say that a successful entrepreneur might not be that good a bet because he's had his cake, he needs a bigger cake, he'll take more money. Let us fund a unsuccessful entrepreneur who's learned his lessons. Obviously, if he blames it on somebody else, his failure on somebody else, he's not the right guy to back. But if he's learned his lessons, maybe that is a good guy to back. So you develop these patterns, so to speak, from your past experience and kind of play that out over time. That is there is a base of knowledge of 20 years. Every year keeps on adding those nuances, so to speak. You learn the rules in the first 10 years, then you keep on adding the exceptions, if you will. So I think that's the way I like to think about how my framework has changed.
Right. Learning is constantly evolving, especially in venture capital. Technology of yesterday is old technology and is old already.
I know. Go ahead.
Sure. So tell me about one of the biggest mistakes or failures you've made in your investing career and the lessons you learned.
So I'll take a more recent one. This was a company called eTechies, which was in the technical services business. Essentially, the idea was to repair your laptop or any other device, printer, etc. at home, either through visits to the home or remotely, so to speak. Our idea then, this I'm talking 2011, we backed a guy who done remote services, remote technical services for American corporations sitting out of, let's say, places like Wipro, Spectramind, etc. So experience from that perspective. We decided to do this in India because there was no established brand, so to speak, of this thing. Best Buy had a brand for technical repair, if I remember correctly. That was what we were trying to emulate in some senses. But what happened was, I think we started in Delhi, then rolled it out to major cities without making Delhi really profitable. Okay. So that classic mistake that we make in venture capital, because money seems to be available, going into another new city like Bangalore, Hyderabad, etc., seemed to be so easy. There was a SWAT team available. You went out, and we ended up in a situation where we were leaking everywhere. And at the end of the day, small funds like us have only limited amount of money. If it is a leaky bucket, there are 5 leaks in the boat, then you can't fix it. If there is only 1 or 2 leaks in the boat, then you can. That's what happened here. Premature scaling, so to speak, is what the term is, I believe. That was a classic mistake. As it happened, the entrepreneur was a good friend of mine, so it was a traumatic from that perspective. Good that both of us have settled and he's gone and done something else. But it was a not so nice experience, so to speak. But you learn your lessons.
Right. So, what are the characteristics you look for in an entrepreneur? What makes a successful entrepreneur as a person?
So I think the way I look at it, basic leadership qualities, standard leadership qualities that you would see across the board. Barack Obama is a good example of leader, for example. So those qualities you need in a person, because at the end of the day, sales skills is another thing. Passion and persistence are two things that I think is it conveys. Basically, if you don't have the passion or the persistence, you will not be able to either last the journey or be able to sell yourself, your concept to customers, employees, partners, etc., etc. But what I found to be as I get older, I think I get softer, as I say, and I think psychology comes into play. I think the this delayed gratification point, people that thing. If you have heard of what is called as a marshmallow experiment, which was on Stanford many years ago, that is a classic test for delayed gratification, so to speak. So people who have to succeed in entrepreneurship or anything that takes along any long project, so to speak, have to have the ability to give up instant gratification for gratification in the future. And I think that's what we try to judge in people, various ways. And that I think is one of the key criteria I use, so to speak. So, for example, an entrepreneur we just backed, he runs. He plays. He's very good at South Indian classical music, which I can tell you, classical music in India is one of the most demanding things that you can think of. He's a great chess player. And there's something else that he went to IIT, IIM, etc., etc. So that tells you that this guy is a horse for long races, isn't it? That's what you want. This guy will keep at it till he cracks it, because he's got that basic DNA. That's the DNA that you look for, and that is my top criteria now. In some senses.
I love that how you're able to take, and especially dealing with this entrepreneur, outside things like greater classical music, chess, running, and able to apply that into his personality to be able to determine if he's going to crack it and be at it for a long time. And I think that's such an amazing thing. Like if you're able to apply examples, somebody that goes to the gym and works out every day, so he's determined for the long-term game, because you're not going to get a six-pack or lose weight overnight. So
I know what you mean. And it's not that easy also. No? It's also, this company also has 6 founders. So 6 founders is one link too many. So and each of them are pretty good. So what happens is egos could get in the way. So you think about all of those things. So as I said, I become softer as I grow older. So I think that is today's psychology interests me more than technology in some sense.
Well, you should go back to school, get a degree in psychology.
Maybe I should.
So what have you found? You just mentioned 6 founders. Over the years, what have you found to be the successful ratio of number of founders?
I used to think it was 3 till some time back. Many of our successful companies coming into, let's say, 2014-15 had 3 founders. But now I've realized, now I think there is no, this is not black and white, but now I think 2 is probably the ideal number, because what happens is even in a 3-member team, one guy falls behind eventually. That we see in successful companies as well as unsuccessful. So my thinking now is probably 2 is the best bet to go. 3 is just one too many, and 1 obviously is hit by a truck risk. So you wouldn't want to do that, except in exceptional circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what do you look for then in a startup that comes to you? So you have the startup that says, hey, Parag, we want to get your investment. We want to see if investors wants to invest in us. What do you look for?
So the thing that we have done at Inventus is we have fairly diverse set of folks. So I come, my financial training is good. I've been in this business for a long while. One of my partners, Samir, is a product marketing guy, product/sales marketing guy who's been selling PCs, etc. Before he did that for multiple years. And third guy is Rutvik, who comes from Google, etc. on the product side in particular. So I think all three of us bring different viewpoints to the table. So diversity is important. My father was a teacher, taught me this diversity of viewpoint is exceptionally important, and that is what we have achieved. And so everybody tends to look at those businesses in their own different ways. So I bring my experience to the table, my ability to understand the numbers. At times the numbers are so small you can't understand the numbers, but the way I understand the operations of a company is through the numbers. So that's how my brain works. And Samir and Rutvik are look at the business differently. So that's what we do. But the core things remain the same. The quality of the team, number one, probably 60-70% weightage. Number two is the size, the growth in the market. Number three, you have a distinct competitive advantage, and then you drill down again into each of these buckets. So that's how I would describe it.
Right. So, what do you think currently of the current state of Indian startup ecosystem, and where do you think it's going to go in 2019, 2020, 21?
So as we briefly discussed before we started off, I think it is headed in the right direction. It's like I think the ecosystem as a whole, the set of lawyers, the set of support systems, everything is growing. Angels ecosystem is growing. Series A guys are growing. Everything is kind of coming together. Indian ecosystem now, the thing that I don't like about it as much, and maybe that's true of most ecosystems, is that it goes through very frequent ups and downs. Maybe we follow the India and China at the same time, and consequently we have our sine curves at far higher amplitudes at times, thanks to this. And as a consequence, again, things seem to be going a bit out of control in terms of companies raising $1 billion, some startup founders raising $30 million in seed money, which is kind of crazy for a market our size. So that part of it worries you a bit. I think the other thing is exits. On the exit front, leave aside Flipkart, which is a grand exit and a beautiful one at that, and proved people's faith in the ecosystem. Leaving that aside, we are still doing very ordinarily. So those are the two big questions. But otherwise, it is my belief that India is headed in the right direction. That slope, some people will say 70 degrees. I disagree. I think the upward slope is of the order of 30 degrees, but it is a good upward slope. So that's.
Now, one thing India, the ecosystem, has a lack of is the amount of exits. And something obviously that hopefully will catch on and will catch up. I mean, you obviously have Flipkart, but that size of companies going either public or being bought out, either by, let's say, a foreign company, or you have, for example, all the bigger startups in India, like all purchasing the smaller companies. But there's one thing that is a lack of is the exit. Is there a reason for that? And how could it be fixed?
So I think it's a question of maturity. As we discussed, 2005 is when the ecosystem really started. So we are talking just 12 years, 12, 13 years, which is not a whole lot of time. We haven't created that many great technology companies, so to speak. It's too early in some senses to judge. So that is one thing. Second thing, I think the Indian companies, the ones that have cash, have tended to we have this tendency in India to throw bodies at the problem. If I could be crude, it's like I'll make it. Why do I need to buy it? So the Indian software companies, which had a lot of cash on their books, have never bought Indian companies. They've gone out and acquired Norwegian companies at some places you can find on the map, but they will not acquire Indian companies. So that has led to this thing. I think the foreign companies, and the bigger ones in particular, the Googles, Facebooks, etc., have made one or two acquisitions each, early days yet, but all of them are very engaged in the ecosystem. Let's say Amazon through AWS and now Alexa initiative, etc., is very engaged here. That's where it starts. It first starts with partnerships and all of that. We saw, since we had a US-India this thing VC firm, we saw that partnerships eventually lead to a acquisition offer, etc., etc. And I think those are the beginnings as the Microsofts and the Googles and the Amazons start engaging with the ecosystem, dedicated people catering to VCs, catering to ecosystem development. That's when it starts, and over a period of time, we believe these things will happen far more. That's the view, at least at this point.
Well, I definitely agree with you, and I definitely hope so. I for sure hope so. So, what happens? Let's say, you walk into IIT, they ask you to give a class on entrepreneurship. It's a bunch of young kids that have not started a startup, but they all want to start a startup. What is your message for your go-to message for these kids?
So I think I am a somewhat cautious guy, I should say. So the first message is first take care of your, the financial security is essential because this is a long journey. So, what being at a job of sorts for 2-3 years does is it gives you an exposure to the world. You realize that there are certain problems that you could solve in that extended world, and that's when you go. So I'm not a big proponent of people getting into entrepreneurship right after college, so to speak. Yes, there are those extraordinary few like Steve Jobs and many others in India as well who have done well, but I am more of a 2, 3, 4 years. Give yourselves 2, 3, 4 years for some of these things to play out, so to speak, before you jump into entrepreneurship. And that's the message that I would give. In our times, for example, people didn't even know how to spell entrepreneurship, but today, thanks to Flipkarts and others being in the papers and constantly covered ecosystem, lots of startups recruiting people from the IITs. So work at a place, work at a startup, a decent sized startup, let us say Series B startup for 2, 3 years. Get to know the tricks of the trade, get to know how the founders work, how they tackle business problems, how they change direction, etc. See that at a distance and then start off. By the time you have built some contacts, you can also raise some angel money, seed money, and then start out. That's my advice.
Right. Well, I'm sure also another question is that because entrepreneurship is such a hot thing, every person is probably thinking, you know what? Why build a startup? Let me fund a startup. Let me get into VC, or let me get into angel investing. And I'm sure every banker or every person that worked in finance thinks, you know what? If I was good at private equity, I'm pretty good at venture capital, no? Mm-hmm. So what tips could you give to become a better investor, or for a young kid that wanted to get into venture capital?
Okay, so I think the one thing that I lacked was having worked at startups or having been closely associated with startups. So I was at a distance. I didn't have that operational expertise. That is essential. So to that extent, I would say if you want to become an entrepreneur, work closely, as I said in answer to the previous question as well. Work closely with in a good entrepreneurial company for a while before kind of starting up. Sorry, I'm getting lost. Could you repeat that question again? Huh?
Sure. So the first question was, how can you become a better investor?
Okay.
And the second thing is, sure. Go ahead.
Sorry. I think better investor is self-reflection. I think you look at your own mistakes, you explore your own mistakes, constantly keep talking to people, but more importantly, talk to yourself. I think read like crazy, find out what is happening in the world, why what is happening is happening. You'll discover that there are people that you respect, whose views generally are well thought out, etc., etc. So build those relationships, meet them once every month. Getting to be an investor is not easy because VC investment roles are very few. So you link, therefore you are, so to speak. So you keep on linking with these people, try and get an opportunity. But in the meantime, try and develop a thesis. I found that investing in small companies on the stock market in India, what has happened is India is probably one of those stock markets that has a 6,000-7,000 listed companies. The bar for listed companies was very low, so to speak, in terms of size. So investing in some of those companies and seeing their ups and downs also teaches you a lot. So that is another way to kind of test yourself, so to speak. So surround yourself with people who have done it, whose advice you respect, and who clearly are in the ecosystem, and keep at it and self-reflect. Those are the things I would say.
Right. So you mentioned self-reflection, which obviously it's a great habit to have. So what are some non-obvious ideas or habits, right, that that you implemented that changed your life?
So I think this is on the wellness side, fitness side. I think maybe it's not non-obvious, but I think what it does is, because of its long-term nature, as we discussed before, it tends to align with when you're running, let's say, half marathon, and you are at the probably the 10-mile mark, and you're asking yourself, why are you doing this? Everybody else is enjoying yourself. I think that's when you kind of relate with the entrepreneur, so to speak. He does this for 5, 6, 7 years and asks himself the same questions. All my friends are going for the movies in the evening. I'm struggling at my desk, isn't it? How do you keep yourself motivated? So fitness for me was that one way that I could find that obviously did me good, kept me energetic throughout the day, etc., etc. But also taught me a lot in terms of empathizing with entrepreneurs in particular. So that was one way that I think I got rid of my whatever cholesterol or whatever, and in the process I learned something about
Right. And it's so important. The long game. The long game is always worth it. It's never worth playing the short game, which is compromising on your values, your principles, or, short receiving what's it called, instant gratification. It's all about that long game. It's never worth giving it up for the short-term gratification.
There's a book I'm very fond of called English August. It's Indian English kind of a book. There's towards the end of the book, his uncle tells Agastya, the protagonist, don't choose the easy path just because it is the easy path. You will never fulfill yourself by doing so. So I think that is very important.
Right. So you mentioned books. I'm assuming you're for sure an avid reader, constantly reading. So what are some books that influence your way of thinking, and what you recommend to others to read?
Okay, so strangely enough, for VC investors, some of the books that I really admire are from the public market world. Buffett's letters, I believe, should be essential reading to understand business in general for people, and go back to his letters way back 77 and read them page to page till today is my advice to almost everybody who wants to start off in investing of any kind, so to speak. Another person I greatly admire for the method, again a stock market investor, but more a technology stock market, Philip Fisher. He wrote a book called Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits way back in 1957. But it's still taught that is used as a textbook at the Stanford Business School. So he's that good. It was Wiley classic, so to speak. He's from a method perspective, what he called scuttlebutt. How do you analyze a company? There's nothing better in my view. So those are the things. Some of the things that I don't nowadays, in particular, because of what I said, I don't read a whole lot of these American entrepreneurship books. Yes, Delivering Happiness, Tony Hsieh's, that stands out on the B2B side, B2C side. On the B2B side, maybe things like The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Horowitz's book that stands out, but there are very good new books coming out of India. Kashyap Deora has written one, The Golden Tap. He's a very smart guy. He ran a company called Chowpatty out of India, and then there is we talked about failure. This guy has written Failing to Succeed. Vatheeshwaran, who actually started India's first e-commerce company, so to speak, India Plaza, which failed. So some of these books are very good, even though Vatheeshwaran's book is probably poorly edited and all of that. You can criticize it, but the core message of that book, those things are important. Those are the things that I would recommend. That's a lot of recommendations now.
And we know obviously you're very into psychology. So I'm assuming you read a ton of books about psychology, behaviors, habits, patterns, and understanding people and everything.
Yes, so Kahneman is obviously Kahneman and Tversky I've been reading a lot about. Most recently, the Undoing Project being Michael Lewis. I really love the guy. So those guys out from Israel. I mean, how they brought a new thinking to economics in the first place, behavioral science in particular, right. And those are things that I'm delving in a bit over the last 7-10 years. Not that I've become an expert, nowhere close to an expert, but that interests me. Pure psychology, I need to read more about.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, who are some of the people that have made a difference in your life and your mentors?
Okay. So there was this gentleman who I used to report into at GE. He is now a big private equity investor, and as it happens, a small investor in a fund as well. He told me something, and Puneet had less experience in venture capital than me when I joined, but he told me something that still stays with me. He said, Parag, there are 100 reasons not to invest in a company, but there is one that makes you invest in a company. Find that one reason. I think that changed my outlook. 7 years into venture capital, that piece of advice, I've taken it seriously, and I make sure that I listen to an entrepreneur, howsoever weak, flimsy, whatever he seems in the first 5-10 minutes. You tend to form initial impressions, isn't it? I listen to that his speech entirely and try and find that one reason, so to speak. So I think that has made me a better person, a better investor, hopefully, as well. That is one piece of advice I really treasure.
Right. That's phenomenal. Always find that one, that thing that sticks out, that one thing. I love that. So what message do we tell younger Parag? Younger Parag leaving IIM, the whole world is open in front of him. What do we tell him?
So, yes, one of those messages was, most of us think of ourselves as fairly intelligent, smart, etc., and we like to poke holes at things, and your initial time was spent trying to find out those 100 things that Puneet said, so to speak. You thought yourself smart because you could find the 100. So I think I would tell the younger Parag that that's not the specific thing to focus on. Second thing, what being an investor at a young age unfortunately does to you is, see, it's an unequal relationship, especially in a capital-starved economy like India. You are giving out money, so to that extent, it's an unequal relationship, isn't it? It tends to go to your head. It didn't go to my head, but I still didn't realize how important entrepreneurs were at the end of the day. We, as I like to say now, they are the light. We are at best a mirror, isn't it? They are the sun. We are at best Jupiter. Maybe we are even Pluto. I don't know. But that realization was not there in the first 6-7 years of the career. That it is they that create the light, they that create the energy, the passion, the value, so to speak, call it whatever. Those are the two things I would tell a younger Parag.
Right. So Parag, this has been absolutely fun. This has been amazing. I've got to know you, hear your story, hear your venture capital story, hear what's going to happen in India, how Investus goes about stuff. And it's been amazing. You have an amazing journey. And I've learned a tremendous amount. And, one lesson specifically for me that I'm going to take out is the sense play for the long term. Play the long game. It's not worth compromising on anything for a short-term game. It's always about the long term. And I'm assuming, and I'm for sure know that people are going to take out a tremendous amount of lessons from our conversation today. And it obviously goes without saying, if there's anything I can do for you, your family, or for Inventus, please don't hesitate to reach out. Always here. So really, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation as well.
Don't worry, we'll get another one too soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye then.